as we'll see from this report.
This is Toronto's Casey House. It's a hospice where people with AIDS can live and receive medical attention. Casey House is filled with brightly furnished rooms and has the best of medical equipment. There's even a specially built bathtub to accommodate a stretcher. Montreal has its own AIDS hospice called Nazareth House, but as you're about to see, it's a far cry from what Toronto AIDS patients experience. Nazareth House is an unmarked, unfinished building downtown. There are bright rooms, but no furniture. That's because the house still isn't ready yet. Nazareth House was to open last December, but money problems keep delaying its birth. Organizer Dennis Hadley needs about $45,000 to get Nazareth House off the ground. He says the stigma of AIDS may be the reason many Montrealers haven't contributed financially.
It's automatically considered, to be a homosexual problem. And I guess there's an innate resentment towards gay people.
There's lots of work to be done. An elevator needs to be built along this staircase. There are no specially equipped bathtubs. But before any of the major work is done, Nazareth House will have to find the money to pay for the minor work. I'm Simon Dingley for McKenty Live. Back to you, Neil.
Thank you, Simon. And you heard in the report a mention of Casey House. And we want to welcome to McKenty Live this morning a woman that I've been waiting to meet for a long time and for whom I have enormous admiration, June Callwood, who is one of the founders of Casey House, author, broadcaster, social activist, member of the Order of Canada, and author of a new book called Jim, A Life with AIDS, Lester and Orphan Denny's publishers. First, June, is it true in your experience that it's very difficult to, for example, to get volunteers to work with AIDS patients?
No, that's not our experience at all in Toronto. And I'm astonished that Montreal hasn't mobilized similarly. For the furnishing of our hospice, we asked the designers, the interior designers of Ontario, what they could do for us. And what they did was close to $800,000 worth of furnishings and design work. They got construction people who worked for nothing or for cost. The community rallied around. And the government, a very important factor. We have 40 nurses in that hospice. The cost of that is enormous. Our Ontario government is giving us $2.3 million a year in operating funds. Doesn't cover everything, but that's by far the most of it.
We'll come back to that in a moment, but you've written a book. It's a very moving book called Jim, The Life of Someone Who Has AIDS, Jim St. James. He's had AIDS, I think, longer than anyone else in Canada.
We've not found a survivor as long as he is. He was diagnosed 4.5 years ago, but he had symptoms for months before that, so he's probably about 5 years with full-blown AIDS.
June, why did you write this book?
He wanted me to. I didn't want to write the book. I assumed he was going to die. Everybody else I knew with AIDS had died or was clearly about to, and I thought he was in that category. We'd never heard of survivors at that time. There are survivors now as much as 8 and 9 years in the States, and I never dreamed he'd be one of them. And I didn't want to be drawn into his death as I would be if I was working on a book while he died.
And you say in the book, I've had enough of death already. You had the tragic death of a son in 1982, killed by a drunken driver, just 21 years old, after whom Casey House is named. Do you think that tragic death in your family of a beloved son affected your attitude toward death and toward the writing of this book?
Certainly towards the death of the young. It's wrong. It's wrong for the young to die. And with AIDS, it's killing young people. So I felt that was what I was expressing, outrage that would happen. Untimely death was happening to so many people, and so many of them rejected by families, so that they would have kind of impersonal deaths in hospitals, which, and especially a few years ago, were themselves rejecting of people with AIDS. So the hospice seemed to me the only outlet for dealing with this.
Now, why, though, did you think that Jim St. James' life was justified a biography. I mean, there are, after all, almost 2,000 people with AIDS in Canada. What is that there is especially significant about his life?
I guess mostly that he was wanted to discuss the whole of it. A very honest man, very complex, and in some ways, as everyone is, protecting of his privacy, but more open than most, and that he represented another dimension of the struggle of being gay, in that he's belongs to a fundamentalist religion, mm-hmm. Jehovah's Witness, mm-hmm. and it presents the crisis of gayness much more intensely. Mm-hmm. The crisis that an adolescent feels when he or she finds that sexual attraction is to the same sex. Mm-hmm. When you belong to a faith which says that your God will not tolerate you, that you're an abomination because of your sexual preference, and then you're trying to struggle to keep the faith, and you can't do anything about the preference. That moral agony is intriguing, and Jim was willing to explore that.
Now, let's stay with that for just a second. We welcome your calls on any aspect of AIDS. You're thinking about it. Perhaps you know someone who has AIDS. 1-800-361-0300. Religion and the attitude of religion, not just Jehovah's Witnesses, but to AIDS. How do you assess that in Canada?
Well, we see this in the United Church right now, yes. What's happening there, and that is in one of the range within Christianity, one of the ones one expected to be most enlightened. Mm-hmm. And these fears of homosexuality run very deep. Mm-hmm. I guess in Jungian terms, it almost looks like it's in our collective unconscious. And the Bible gives some support. Is it Leviticus?
Leviticus is one, although, as you know, biblical scholarship has changed radically its interpretation of some of these passages.
Well, Jim does not believe in reinterpreting.
No.
That's all very true for him. But in the understanding that one might bring to this is that at a time when it was important to have the fertility and continuity of the tribe, and people died at an early age, they didn't want to waste seed. Yep. These prohibitions probably made sense, and to carry them into modern life, it seems to me, if I can use that as a Christian, profoundly unchristian. However, it's certainly it's there for him. He has not been able to deal with it in this kind of intellectual bad translation, right. Rationalization mm-hmm, of it. Mm-hmm. So what he has done is pretty intriguing. He has decided that the elders of the Jehovah's Witness must be wrong, that God made him a gay man, yeah. And therefore God has to deal with the situation.
In a sense, I heard him yesterday on Lifetime, I think, with mm-hmm. you. In a sense, it's God's problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and that he's quite tranquil about that now, but he still very badly needs his church, and he hopes, he's been excommunicated. Yes. He hopes to be taken back someday.
We're going downtown for a call. Go ahead, please. You're on with June Callwood.
Good morning, Miss Callwood. How are you doing?
Good morning.
I've been wanting to talk to you for quite a long time. First off, I just want to say that in the Montreal area, there are several volunteer organizations who really mm-hmm. have been picking up a lot of the backload, a lot of the so-called stuff that people don't want to do as far as being there for the AIDS patients, their support systems and what have you like that, and they're doing a phenomenal job. I'm a member of one group called AIDS Community Care. We've got volunteers from, like you were saying, the community rallies around. We've got volunteers from every background that you couldn't possibly imagine. I think that the biggest problem in Quebec and in the rest of Canada is people think that Canada's got, say, 2,000 AIDS cases. They think that's not much, but they don't realize that is in direct proportion to the amount of AIDS patients in the States. Where we have, say, 2,000, 2,500, they've got 25,000. We are 10% of their population. People up here still don't believe that it's a major problem in Canada.
June, I'd like you to comment on that. Are we sort of not with it?
Well, we're not, and we have at least 50,000 who are HIV positive. No one knows the number exactly, and the likelihood that almost all of them will develop full-blown AIDS is now becoming all too apparent. And the idea that it's a gay disease is irrational. It's a virus. We have, in Casey House Hospice, we've had more than 60 deaths, and a good many of them have been heterosexual men, not bisexual, heterosexual men. We have 2 women on the waiting list, and we have a child who will be coming to Casey House to die. It's a virus, and it is all around us now.
That thing with the disease, the doctor up at the Montreal General told me there's only one thing we can guarantee with this disease, is that all these people who are HIV positive right now, there's only one thing we're going to guarantee, is that they're all going to die.
Okay, sir. Thank you for an interesting call, and we'll be right back with June Callwood after this short break. We're back with June Callwood, talking mainly about AIDS, society's attitude, or what society can do. I was amazed to be, June, that Jim is so open, for example, about his homosexual lifestyle. He talks about having hundreds of partners, hundreds.
I know.
I mean, how does he explain, and how do you understand, because this sounds like compulsive, obsessive behavior.
I think it is, too. He also was into the violent sex, S&M.
Yeah, yes.
He says that having experienced total rejection in adolescence, as gay men do, lesbians are often not easily detected, but a gay man with overt symptoms can suffer terrible persecution. Having often been rejected by their parents, trying to manage some kind of self-esteem in a sea of "you're awful, you're evil, don't come near me," sets up a dynamic which can cause people to decide, I'm damned anyway, I might as well have a good time.
Yeah.
I might as well have an outrageously
Yeah.
good time.
Yeah.
They've thrown me out as a human being, so I throw myself out as well.
I'll prove it.
I'll do anything I can.
Yeah.
And what AIDS has done in most extraordinary way, and what a terrible way to get a lesson like this, is allow the gay community to find its humanity and compassion, and allow men to care deeply and give and commit to one another, so that while the lifestyle is no longer tolerated or tolerable, that kind of promiscuous lifestyle, and is dying down, that the incidence of AIDS among the gay population is going down. It's the only place it's going down.
What do you mean in the book when you talk about safe sex for men who have AIDS?
Well, Jim says that he always wears a condom, and that's a latex condom. He mostly has sex with men who already have AIDS. I think maybe entirely. I don't know for sure.
Right.
And, of course, the libido is not working that well. He's a very sick man. And also that he does not have an orgasm inside anyone's body. That's what he means by safe sex.
We're going to callers. St. Leonard, go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, hello.
Yeah, June, why won't you admit that AIDS is a homosexual disease?
Homosexuals have it, but it's not a homosexual disease.
You admit it up to a point. You have to admit that it is homosexual disease. Look
No, homosexuals have it. It is just a virus. It's not a smart virus that goes someplace and not someplace else.
90% is with homosexuals.
In Canada, it's about 90%. In Africa, 95% are heterosexual.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Welcome.
thank you. Montreal West, go ahead, please.
I'd just like to say that I think that the school programs are very good about AIDS and all STDs, and I'd like to say that I've learned a lot about them, and I just think that they're very good.
So, okay, thank you for
Glad to hear
calling. The problems that people like Jim have, you outline in the book 2 major ones. Poverty, they're poor.
Mm-hmm.
This may not apply to Jim because he came from a rather wealthy family.
Yes.
And social isolation.
The social isolation for some is the most, is devastating, and poverty increases it, of course. With money, your social isolation isn't total. You can go to a restaurant, you can go to a film, you can move around the city.
But the loneliness drove Jim
loneliness
to attempted suicide.
The loneliness is awful. We saw maybe something is happening another thing that's happening that might be, it's almost redemptive. There was a Japanese man who left his home because he was gay and didn't want his parents to be ashamed of him. And he wound up in Casey House dying and intended to have his ashes shipped home and wanted us to tell his family that he had died in a car accident. Someone, I think our pastoral counselor, may have persuaded him to give his parents a chance. And he phoned and told them what had happened. And you know, we had his parents and 2 sisters were on the next plane from Tokyo. And for them to be able to say goodbye appropriately, to be with him, would help them with their grief so much. It was a gift he gave to them, to trust them with this. And very moving that those people speaking no English whatsoever came and stayed till that man died. It was wonderful for them all.
I think one of the saddest things in the book, and listening to Jim yesterday on Lifetime, is the continued rupture with his mother, that he doesn't see his mother.
His mother has accepted the advice of her elders that her son is dead.
She's a Jehovah's Witness.
She's a Jehovah's Witness, and Jim is dead in terms of Jehovah's Witness terms. Therefore, you cannot be speaking to someone who's dead. So for the past 3 years, she has no contact with him at all, and during that time he's had chemotherapy, he's been close to death. Well, I think I think it's appalling, and I think for her, what they're putting her through, that she cannot touch him, cannot be with him, is awful. And it is the one thing that brings him to tears. He almost always chokes up just to think about it. He says when a man is sick, he wants his mom. And it's true.
Yeah, without pursuing it, I have difficulty identifying with this image of a terrorist God. It really...
I would not want to have a faith with a terrorist God.
No. NDG, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just recently I had the chance to be with someone who was dying of AIDS, and I didn't really make it in time and support them enough, and they died, and now it's too late. And I just think that everybody who has the chance, who feels any sort of care or has felt care for someone who has AIDS now, should just get right over there and support them regardless of their prejudices or beliefs.
June, you might comment on that.
I'd like to. I've found with my experiences with death that if you can be there for the person who's dying, you don't have as much grief. I think when you have grief and guilt mixed together, you've got a terrible combustion. And the way to discharge your responsibility to yourself is to be with someone and see them through it. And it'll be easier for you, and it'll be something that it'll give you a gain that you will never lose. So in Winnipeg, a man dying of AIDS asked the community to help him. He wanted to die at home. And 100 people signed up to work in shifts around the clock and be with him. It's quite a celebration of us as a tribe. Quite wonderful.
And it just gives me an opportunity to say that Nazareth House, that AIDS project, is going to go forward, even though delayed. And volunteers are needed, and you'll have an interview in which you will be assessed for your ability, etc., to work with AIDS people. So you could give Nazareth House a call at 933-6916. Nazareth House, 933-6916. Montreal, go ahead, please.
Yes, my point is I took care of someone with AIDS who was totally rejected by his gay friends. His gay friends rejected the fact that he had AIDS and could not deal with their own life being threatened by the illness. Their response was, well, he was an irresponsible person who went into drugs instead of trying to self-heal himself. And he was totally rejected. And their rationale was, well, we didn't want him as our friends anyways. And
now,
the problem is that you have to come into terms with your fears, with your homosexuality, with your fear of death.
Yeah.
with your fear of loneliness, whether you're healthy or whether you're sick.
June, you're saying that that is becoming better in the community.
I think right across the country, people are taking death in a more natural way, not isolating it in a hospital or shunning a dying person because death is contagious. I'm not talking about AIDS being contagious, that death is contagious. You see your own mortality when you confront someone who's dying. What that caller just said is the fear of death. That's, I think that you could disguise it as I'm afraid of an infection or something. What you're afraid of is that you're going to see your own death in someone dying. But we're doing that now, where people are beginning to stay at home. We're getting support groups, hospice kind of home support groups. The palliative care in hospitals, there's an increasing pressure on hospitals to recognize the need for a palliative care unit that doesn't operate by the clock the way a hospital does, and technology doesn't dominate. We're doing better, Neil.
Yes, we're doing better. And one of the reasons we're doing better is because of people like you, June. Jim says, I've got AIDS, but AIDS hasn't got me. Where does this man get this depth of, in a sense, spirituality?
I guess you have to say that he gets it partly from his faith and partly from his lifestyle as a person. The personality that he has developed is to be buoyant, to be confident, to have a positive outlook. And when he can't manage that, and there's lots of times he can't, he hides away. He just doesn't answer his telephone. He waits till he gets his courage back. And then he puts on, he's an actor. Yeah. He's a professional actor all the time. And he puts on his Superman outfit in the little telephone booth, and out he goes to face the world. It's a performance, but hats off to it.
Well, it's a performance, and it's enormously well outlined in the book that June has written, Jim, A Life of with a Person with AIDS. And we will be right back after this short break. I want to thank June Callwood for being our guest this morning. Thank you, June.
Neil, it's been a privilege.
And next week on McKenty Live, among other things, Mark Lalonde on Quebec politics, Eric Kieran's on free trade, and a surrogate mother, very interesting, from London, Ontario. Tomorrow on McKenty Live, a former nightclub entertainer and stripper, Annie Ample. See you tomorrow at 10.
Neil McKenty's wardrobe provided exclusively by Henry Marks on Drummond Street and Westmount Square. Transportation for McKenty Live provided by Bernard Limousines, 353-5881.